I know something I'm attuned to in my own industry is these office conversion projects. And I know here in Denver, Gensler just recently published a study, I think earlier in the summer, where they looked at something like maybe 20 or so buildings that are candidates, I would say, for an office to residential conversion. I'm curious, just your thoughts on that whole effort. As I learned more, it's certainly much more complex than it might appear on the surface. So, speaking to a professional, I'm really curious your opinion about the viability and the potential success of some of these large scale projects.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of viability, and I think it's a very relevant conversation. Though I think we also need to take a little step back and maybe think about smaller, more bite-sized buildings before we start thinking about the larger, more complicated ones. I think residential to office is something we've been doing in Denver since the Renaissance provided by the Coors Field infill, over 25 years ago. And that was converting warehouses to lots and office space. And I think that continues within the Denver urban fabric without any real hiccup. When we start looking at these larger projects, there are some barriers to entry. I know that the Gensler study looked at some of the larger buildings in Denver, where the price tags of these buildings are still hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think that's a real challenge to move forward with some of those larger projects just from a pure financing study at this point. But we can be thinking about looking at some other uses for those buildings. And I think bringing more schools and daycares and light industrial to some of these office spaces might make a lot of sense. I mean, we're looking at office to residential conversions for a few clients around the country and studying options on that, none of which are the size of some of the projects that were in that Gensler study. But I think it's an important part of getting to a more mixed use environment and invigorating our neighborhoods with mixed uses, because I think that's where we're all eventually heading. Not every project needs to have all of these mixed use components, but it needs to be thinking more broadly about how an individual building can contribute to that urban fabric in our mixed use communities. So one of the other things that I think about a lot is, what does Denver's central business district need? Because it's certain areas of it are hurting from a lack of occupancy in these office buildings. And that's not only because of the work from home, but it's also, in my mind, that there's not enough people residing in those areas to keep those communities vibrant. So, I mean, my first thing would be to try to bring in more residential buildings into those areas, which would help support the retail and other services that are provided in those communities. I think it's really appealing to contemplate the office to residential conversion, but I think we need to think about it from a slightly different perspective, which is we actually just need more residents. And it doesn't necessarily need to be through those conversions, or that we need to be tackling the largest projects.